So, welcome to It's John Noble here, Australia Broken, Wide Open. So, the first episode today, we're going to talk about a 13-year-old girl named Bung who went missing in Boronia in 2011. Now, before I get into the story of the disappearance of Bung, I want to tell you a little bit about Bung and a little bit about her family. So, Bung was originally from Thailand. She lived over there with her mother, Vanita, and her older sister. Now, her mother had divorced from her father and was single. Now, in about 2004, she'd come to Australia for a trip and she'd met Fred Patterson. Now, over that time, they'd got along really well and kept in contact. Fred eventually went to Thailand and they had a little business going. And he became sort of like the girl's father, really. Anyway, that business fell through and they decided to come over to live in Australia. And they ended up settling in a little place in Victoria, Boronia. Now, Bung's real name was actually, I hope I get this right, was Bung Siriboon. Now, I think I messed that up, but anyway, that's her real name. Everyone called her Bung for short. So, Fred had actually gone over to Thailand quite a few times, really. He loved the culture, and he really became a father figure to the two kids, which they didn't have in their life at the time. And but when they got over here, when they did move to that little place called Boronia, now Boronia is full of middle-class families. Does have a little bit of a drug problem near the train stations and the shopping centres, but nothing major. It is a nice little place, and they sort of created a little haven, really, where they ended up moving to. Now, when they did move to Boronia, this was about 4 years before Bung's disappearance. Where they moved to was actually only a short distance from where Bung was going to be attending school, Boronia Heights. And, it was a pretty good school at the time. It ended up closing down a little bit later on and joining with K-12. But that's another story. Now, that morning that Bung went missing, it was a funny one because normally she actually walked to school with her friends. This morning, it was raining, and they were all getting a lift in. So she was actually going to be walking on her own. Now, her school was only, roughly 1 kilometre from where she lived. Now, this Bung, she was very passionate about school. Never was really absent. Thrived at maths, and her English was really, really good. She'd really fitted in with the Australian culture. And like Fred Patterson said, her stepfather, she wasn't quite streetwise, but she knew not to get in a car with a stranger. She was smart enough to know that was not what to do. So, her disappearance was very strange and out of the ordinary. She wasn't someone to run away or to do anything like that. It's all a little bit strange in this case, that because her body has never been found, but I'll get to that later on. She was last seen on Thursday, June the 2nd, 2011. At approximately, about 8:25 in the morning, the reports are. That's when she left her family home on Elsie Street and Boronia to walk to school. It was a 10-minute walk, so 1 kilometre, guys. Really not far. Pretty short walk. And, in 2011, even now, a lot of kids walk to high school. Like I said before, there's several kids that she'd normally walk with. Diami, which was one of her really, really good friends. They were all getting a lift that morning because of the rain. Now, on the morning of her disappearance, she would walk up Elsie Street, east to Albert Avenue, then over to Harcourt Road, then onto Monaco Street, which was the back gate to her school. Now, it's alleged that she was dressed in a zip-up blue school jacket, carrying her backpack. Now, Bung was first seen by a neighbour a short time later on Elsie Street, walking towards Albert Avenue at 8:35. Now, this has been confirmed by police. There was another possible sighting on Harcourt Street, roughly about 130 metres away from her school. But this one wasn't confirmed by police. Obviously, there wasn't enough evidence at the time to say that was definitely Bung that they had seen that day. Just weeks prior to Bung's disappearance, a similar unsettling incident had occurred in Melbourne's eastern suburbs. Now, on her way to school, an 11-year-old girl of Asian descent was walking along Bennett Street in Boronia. Now, she claimed at the time that a man in a white surgical mask had tried to lure her into a vehicle. But the courageous young girl quickly threatened to use her mobile phone, and this man fled. Now, it did come out later on that this girl was actually lying about this, what happened this day. She had actually admitted it a few weeks later, which was quite sad, really, that the young girl would make up such a story, maybe for attention. But however, there was one that was confirmed. Now, this 16-year-old girl in Ringwood, which is only 10 kilometres from Boronia, whose attempted abduction was weeks earlier, this could have been the same person that tried this. Well, this guy was never not found either. So it makes sense that the two could be linked, especially in such a close area. Ringwood really isn't far from Boronia, so I think, you know, them two really could be linked. The police did look into it. Obviously, they didn't know the car of the 16-year-old girl, so it was really hard for them to put a picture together of who it could have been. Now, Bung had a few Facebook pages under Bung Siriboon, and also a MySpace page. Now, there were several of these, and they're all active accounts. Her age was listed at 27, but this was pretty normal for young kids to have other accounts to talk to boys and girls and, you know, friends on that their parents didn't know about. There's not really anything out of the ordinary, really. But she did say, "There is a strange man talking to me." Now, this is what she had written on her MySpace, and it's scary. Now, the police did look into this straight away after Bung's disappearance, obviously, because this was, you know, they thought maybe there was something on there that they could find, but they searched it all and they did not find a thing. So they could rule out online predator, you know, luring her to a car or trying to get her to meet up with them. So this was now out of the picture. But, you know, with the police, they have to eliminate every possible outcome before they start going, she's been abducted. This is part of what police do in a police investigation. So obviously her stepfather, Fred, was the next person they expected had maybe done something with Bung. Now, Fred welcomed this at the time. He welcomed this because he wanted to be ruled out. This would have been really hard for them, actually, being a suspect in this case. You know, knowing that he loved these girls as much as what he did. But, you know, obviously the police had to rule him out before they could again go down other avenues of what could have happened that day. They did search his house. They searched the cupboards, the back, everything. A neighbour had actually said they'd seen Fred digging, and this was another reason they really wanted to look into him and Vanita. But he was also ruled out of this case. And it must have been really hard for that family to be, you know, to be a suspect in something like this, in such a sad case. Now, you know, at this time, no one had heard from Bung. Nothing. She just disappeared without a trace. Sorry, guys, getting a bit dry there. So, in the days following to Bung's disappearance, the SES volunteers extensively searched around Boronia, the forested areas, including the Dandenong Ranges. They'd gone through CCT footage, tracked down tradies that had been through the area at the time, delivery drivers. They'd gone through everything. They'd talked to 250 sex offenders that were in the local area, so they could rule out that as well. And they also had 1,000 pieces of information relating to Bung's disappearance. Obviously calls of people ringing up and sightings and stuff like that. But they found nothing. Not any CCTV footage, nothing, not a thing. Which is, again, is really strange someone could disappear without a trace. Now, I'm sure normally on the mornings of Bung walking to school with her friends on a nice day, there would have been other people walking their dogs. But because it was raining that day, there was just no one out there. And then so no one's seen her get snatched and put into a car, but no one's seen her inside of a car or anything like that. There was a couple of sightings, but there was no real confirmed evidence saying 100% this is what she was. This is where she was seen. Sorry, guys, the mic left my face. Police soon come to a grim conclusion after obviously checking out Fred and all the CCTV footage and talking to a bunch of people that this was an abduction. Something serious had happened to Bung, and it wasn't just that a family member or she just ran away, and was being a naughty teenager at the time. Now, they do think she was lured into a car in broad daylight. The first possible sighting occurred around 15 minutes after Bung left for school. An Asian girl in her teens was seen in the back seat of a white Ford Falcon driving along Floreston Road. Now, all they'd seen was an Asian girl in the back of a white Ford Falcon. So, again, there's no real evidence to say that that was her. It could have been anyone of Asian descent, really. Now, the driver was described as a male Caucasian in his late 50s to early 60s. 3 years later, police released more information about the reported sighting of a heavily tattooed man driving a white Kingswood station wagon with a girl of Asian appearance. Again, it's Asian appearance. It's really, it's a 50-50 whether it was really Bung. But these things have to be looked into in a case like this. So this came out 3 years later. So this was when they came back to the investigation again to see if they could obviously get any more leads on this case. Because it's very unsettling to think that a 13-year-old girl went missing without a trace and no one's seen her on the day. The vehicle was driven by a white man aged in his 30s or 40s with a balding or light-coloured hair. The man had a full sleeve tattoo on his arms and a large tattoo on the left side of his neck. However, again, the police ruled this out due to the time that she was last actually confirmed sighted. Obviously the times did not match up from when she was last sighted by the neighbour to her being all the way over near Rowville in this white Holden Kingswood. Now, this is another interesting one. There was a house in Heathmont on Fremont Street that was raided in 2011. They'd actually rang the police and said that they had Bung hostage in their basement. Now, this ended up turning out to be a practical joke, which wouldn't have been funny. Really just a waste of police's resources and time back then when they were looking for Bung. But this house did get raided, and obviously they went looking through it to see what they could find. Because again, you have to follow up every lead in something like this. You can't just go. You can't let any of these slip by past you. You've got to keep looking. So, police continued following up tips they received from the public. This one blew my mind when I was researching this. One was a man that went to a brothel in the eastern suburbs in Melbourne, who said he'd seen an Asian girl of Bung's description. Now, the police had to go look into this one as well, but nothing come of it. The lead really just didn't go anywhere. Probably just some drunk bloke that, didn't know what he was doing that day. But again, I just think a little bit of a waste of police time. But again, they have to look into all this. Now, there were other theories about Bung. Maybe it was her birth father, who still lived in Thailand and had taken her. Police reached out to international agencies and federal police for assistance, but there was no proof that Bung had left the country, because there would have been CCTV footage and stuff like that was never found. So there was another case of a 13-year-old girl, Carmen Chang, who was abducted in 1991. Now, I know this is a long time before Bung's disappearance, but the man that abducted her was still active at the time of Bung's disappearance. So this is why I wanted to let you guys know about this one. Now, she lived in her house in Templestowe, northwest of Boronia. Her body was never found, but it was linked to 2 other abductions perpetrated by a man named Mr. Cruel. Now, I could go on for hours about Mr. Cruel. I'm not going to, because this video isn't about him. He was a A really, really, really sick man. Now, the police did rule him out because they didn't think it fitted his MO. Not sure whether that was the right thing to do, but, you know, maybe should have been something that was looked into, maybe just a little bit further. There was also maybe a man just as bad as Mr. Cruel, would you believe it? Gregory Davis. He was active in the 1970s, again long time before, but he was still active of the time of Bung's disappearance. Now, he was jailed for a decade and released in the early 80s. Now, this man was active between his release and 2017. And in this time, multiple girls came out saying about this bloke. Now, he was actually caught because of some DNA he'd given police for another matter, and they'd linked him to a girl dying in the 90s. So he's still in jail now, that bloke. But again, you know, they all had to be looked into, these cases. Now, what also was interesting about Gregory Davis was that he drove a white Ford Falcon, like the one they had seen that day. Now, this made him a major suspect in this case. He was questioned about Bung's disappearance, but because he was very active at the time, but nothing come of it. Now, people like this won't admit to any extra crimes that they don't have to. They'll take it to their grave. But he was definitely a major suspect in Bung's disappearance. Now, they did then create a task force called Task Force Puma, just for Bung's case, in 2011. It had 12 detectives on it. Detective John Potter was part of the task force because he had been on the case for a long time at this point. John Potter had, and he knew a lot about it. And this is why they made him part of the task force, to obviously help them along with the information that they'd already collected over the time. Now, there was 600 calls over the months at this point, over the months after Bung's disappearance, 600 calls of potential leads, really, into what may have happened to Bung that day. In March 2012, 9 months after Bung's disappearance, detectives got a call. The details have never actually been revealed about this one, which is very interesting, really. I question this one a little bit. They encouraged the caller to contact them back because he provided valuable information into Bung's disappearance, but he never did. Now, it's unknown whether he called back, but he did have valuable information. So, you know, a little bit sad that he didn't, or they didn't trace the call and could find out who or where this bloke was. All we know about him really is he contained valuable information. But in August 2012, a man confessed to Bung's disappearance, went to police and confessed that he was only 24 years old. He told police that he'd accidentally hit Bung on the morning of her disappearance. Then said he disposed of her body at a local reserve. Now, police went to the local reserve where they claimed he buried the body, but nothing was found. Now, this guy could have been, had psychosis or something a little bit wrong with him. That cops don't know, but they have to investigate it because he's come in and said, yep, I have done this. But there was nothing found. Now, police did bring him back and they did DNA test his car and him, but Bung's DNA was not found in the car at all. So they came up with nothing. The poor buggers came up with nothing. I bet when they heard this, they thought, yes, we've got the guy, we can give the family some closure. But they can't. But really, it was just, there was nothing in it. Now, in October the same year, he was released shortly after. The police did bring him back in a second time, but he was released again because, I think they realised he was just maybe having them on. Anyway, there was a second person that was that they thought might have been a potential suspect in Bung's disappearance, or a person's of interest. Nothing about this person was released either, but the police did state this man or woman, which they won't tell you what they were, was not ruled out of the case, but there was not enough information for police to prosecute the person. Now, I'm sure they've looked into this person many, many times after this, but they just didn't have the evidence there to take this person to court, which is sad, really. Now, there was another person. Now, this is another interesting one. I probably should have brought him up earlier. Robert Keith Knight. I don't know if you've ever heard of this bloke. He was a bit of a sicko, a bit like Mr. Cruel. Really, really bad man. Now, he was arrested and sentenced in 1998, and he then was released in 2009. They had put him in the streets of Melbourne around the time when Bung went missing. Shortly after Bung went missing, he was arrested again and then committed suicide by killing himself in the remand centre the day before he had to go to court. He was 62 years old, so he matched the description of maybe the person in the white Falcon or the white Ford. And he was around at the time Bung went missing. So definitely, he had 1,000 images of things he shouldn't have, and then killed himself the day before. So here's another one. We will never know whether he was involved with Bung, but he was definitely in the area at the time of Bung's disappearance. Now, this is another strange one. He also drove a white Ford Maverick, which was very, very similar to the car that the people had said they'd seen Bung in after her disappearance. But again, because of what happened to him, we'll really never, ever know. It took until 2014, and the police finally released a $1 million reward for anyone with information leading to Bung's disappearance. And that still remains to this day. And no one's ever collected it. So that $1 million reward still remains. Now, Detective Inspector Dean Thomas from Homicide Squad at Victoria Police said that despite the significant investigation, a number of public appeals over the 13 years during Bung's disappearance has not been located. No one has been charged in relations of her disappearance, and her backpack has never been recovered by police. No, it's really hard when there's not a body being found, no backpack, which means there's no DNA evidence. So the police have had a really, really hard time in this case. All that they can do is go through the information that they've got to eliminate people that were active or around that time. But that's all they can really do in a case like this. And they've done everything they possibly could, really, with Bung. Boronia is not a very big place. Things like this don't normally happen in that area. As I said at the start of the video, the drug use around the stations and the shopping area is definitely there. But other than that, it really is a middle-class area. So this isn't something that just happens every day. But look, Bung's parents, they did stick around for a little while. Her mum was obviously just heartbroken, and so was her stepfather, Fred. They were heartbroken. That they couldn't. There was nothing to this case. To say that she was dead or she wasn't. They didn't know whether she just ran away to somewhere, and there was just not enough information released, really. Now, they were last seen publicly on the project in 2021. Now, they went on there and they talked about Bung's disappearance. By this time, it had been 10 years, so it was a 10-year anniversary. And, you could just see in her mum's eyes how heartbroken she was that nothing had happened over the 11 years. There was no body found. There was sort of nothing, which is really sad. Now, her mother since has moved back to Thailand due to just a trauma. She just couldn't deal living in Melbourne anymore, and so is her older sister. Her older sister did some university here afterwards, and then eventually she moved back to Thailand with her mother as well. Now, her stepfather, Fred, he remains in Melbourne, and from what I know, he actually lives in the same house still, and he's been an advocate ever since on any radio stations or anything like that he goes on. He publicly talks about Bung and wanting some answers on her disappearance. He's always vocal I think he's holding on to the belief that Bung's still alive. I think both parents are, really. Now, Bung's high school friends went back there for the 10-year anniversary to mourn Bung. There was about 7 of them. Diame's the main one. Now, she's been interviewed a few times over Bung's disappearance. Obviously heartbroken. They were 13-year-old girls, friends, and one of their friends went missing without a trace. Now, Bung would be 27 years old now. 27 years old. And, what a life she had ahead of her, really. And someone cut that short. Some coward cut that short on that poor young girl. And I hope in this case that someone eventually comes forward and gives some information. Someone knows what happened that day to Bung, and they are obviously either too scared or don't want to come forward. Now, I want to keep talking about stories like this so that it stays in the public eye. The thing is, with things like this, people forget about it very quickly. And I don't think this is something anyone should forget about. We should keep talking about cases like this. So, look, if you want to listen to more cases and hear more stories like the one about Bung, subscribe, hit a follow, and give me a like. So, this is the first YouTube I've done. I will get better at it. But I just wanted to bring this story to you and some of the details that you may or may not have known about this case. At the end of all of this, after everything I've read and gone through, I honestly believe that the parents, they really had nothing to do with this. I believe that she was definitely abducted that day, and someone knows something. Whether it was Mr. Cruel that did it, or Gregory, or, all the rest of them that were active at that time, we may never, ever know, really. But anyway, guys, we need to keep this out there. We need to keep talking about this stuff. My next episode will drop in 2 weeks about Claire Morrison and her disappearance. Anyway, I hope you like the video. Peace out.